committee will come to order. First up on our agenda is we're going to have a hearing on Senate Bill 489. But before we do, I just would like to point out to the committee members that you have a yellow folder. This was something that a conferee left after we had a hearing last week on newborn screening. So that's there for you to review. And without anything else, we're going to jump right into the hearing on Senate Bill 489. So we are opening that hearing. And first up is Jenna Moyer with the Revisor's Office to give us an overview of the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, members of the committee. Jenna Moyer, Office of Revisor Statutes. Senate Bill 489 relates to the regulatory authority relating to the spread of infectious or contagious diseases, specifically the Secretary of Health and Environment. And I forgot my copy of the bill downstairs, so apologize for the laptop. Actually, that would be easier. Thank you. Right, in section 1 of this bill, it is amends KSA 65101, and that bill gives broad supervisory authority to the Secretary of Health and Environment, and this bill would strike subsection A5 that allows the Secretary to take action to prevent the introduction of infectious or contagious disease and to prevent the spread or infectious or contagious disease within the state. Section 2 amends KSA 65119, and that first amendment is in subsection A, and it strikes the authority of the county or joint board of health or local health officer to prohibit public gatherings when necessary to control infectious or contagious diseases. And it also does some cleanup at the end of that section. Section 3 amends KSA 65128. And it changes the authority of the Secretary of Health and Environment from designating diseases as infectious or contagious through rules and regulations to submitting a report of those diseases as infectious or contagious to the Speaker of the House of Representatives and the President of the Senate. That way those diseases would not allow to be categorized in rules and regs, but instead that authority would transfer to the legislature. And then in subsection C, current law states that the Secretary would develop and adopt rules and regulations to protect certain individuals who are in medical services or EMS, firefighting, law enforcement, et cetera, where those individuals may come into contact with potentially infectious materials or blood. And that would change that from being the Secretary shall adopt rules and regulations to the Secretary would present a report to the legislature providing recommendations on actions that the legislature should take to protect those individuals who may come into contact with blood or infectious disease through their profession. Section 4 amends KSA 65129, and it strikes references to the Secretary of KDHE. So this would be for infectious or contagious diseases. That authority would instead be only vested in the local health officer, and it would just strike everywhere related to the Secretary, and it would also strike in, that would be subsection A. Well, it was 2, and it would strike that the sheriff, deputy sheriff, or other law enforcement could assist in the execution or enforcement of any order issued under this section, which would mainly be related to isolation and quarantine of individuals. And Section 5 amends KSA 65202, and that again just strikes and it would be now D1, references to the Secretary of Health and Environment to investigate whenever there is a diagnosis of smallpox, diphtheria, typhoid fever, scarlet fever, or any known or infectious contagious disease, and would perform duties to prevent the spread or infectious of those, to to prevent the spread of those infectious or contagious diseases. And so that authority to prevent the spread of those diseases and investigate where those contagious diseases came from would instead lie only with the joint Board of Health or the county. And I will be happy to answer any questions.
Jenna, thank you for that explanation of the bill. Committee, do we have questions for the reviser? Senator Petty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jenna, thank you for going over the bill. So basically, the bill takes out any reference to any oversight authority at the state level, of the Secretary of Health and Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Petty. I don't know if it's that clear because there are references to the Secretary's duties that are left in, but it would definitely curtail much of the authority of the Secretary of Health and Environment to regulate infectious and contagious diseases.
And just as a follow-up, and then on page 4, when you talked about, it would be down on line 32 to 39, that any diphtheria, typhoid fever, acute infantile paralysis, any disease now, if there was any outbreak in this, any communicable disease in the state, that the only authority dealing with this would be at the local level. Is this correct?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Petty, there are other parts of statute where there are other authorities, but this would specific to the investigation. So finding the source of a possible outbreak and using any known measures to prevent this spread of those specific outbreaks would instead, I mean, the authority of the Secretary of Health and Environment would be stricken and it would go only to the county and city level.
And then lastly, on page 5, I see that the word, I believe 4 was added on line 7. So if the local officer doesn't do their duties as now prescribed under this law, they could be prosecuted, they could be removed from office by the County Board of Health. Who is the County Board of Health? I mean, doesn't, is it a Board of Commissioners?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Petty. Often it is the board, often it would be that county board. And the word "for," I believe that was just added as a editorial, just to make the sentence make more sense. But that authority exists in current law. That's not new. If that local health officer doesn't perform any duties, they could be removed by the County Board of Health. So that is current law, and that doesn't change. We just added in that word to make the sentence make more sense.
And the County Board of Health is the county commissioners?
Yes, I believe that's true. I can double check, but I'm pretty sure that's true.
Any further questions? Senator Stephan.
Thank you. Does anything in the bill prevent the Secretary from recommending or educating or any of that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Stephan, there are no changes related to the Secretary of Health's advisory role, but it would change the, the rules and regulations authority.
Okay, committee, I do not see any further questions, so we will move to our proponent testimony. Our first proponent is Greg Smith, Special Deputy Sheriff for Government Affairs, Johnson County Sheriff's Department. Greg, welcome to the committee.
I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. We are proponents of the bill, but I want to be very clear that our support of the bill is strictly on page 4, lines 3 through 5, which strikes the language concerning sheriffs, deputy sheriffs, and law enforcement, and takes us out of the equation of possibly being entangled in a dangerous situation that could place the public and law enforcement at even greater risk. If you paid attention during the pandemic, there was a lot of confusion that went on, particularly in the law enforcement community. There were several executive orders that were issued. There were 4 separate times where the Attorney General's office issued memorandums to law enforcement to assist us in figuring out which order took precedence over the other one. We had a very confused public when the stay-in-place order was issued. We had people calling 911 to let us know that their neighbor got in their car and left their house. I mean, things got that crazy. So one of these types of situations, we understand how they can get, but we just appreciate the clarity that this bill would provide. The law that we're looking at, 65-129B, actually came into effect in 2005. We did the research on the bill to kind of find out the history behind it and where it came from. It started out in House appropriations and was simply a bill to give the KDHE secretary some appointment power. That was the only thing in the bill. Passed out of committee, passed the House by a large margin, went to the Senate. They had one proponent testify in the Senate, then the secretary of KDHE, who just said, hey, I need this appointment power, passed the Senate. But during floor debate in the Senate, there was an amendment added that changed this from a simple appointment bill to, the title actually went to an act relating to public health concerning the Department of Health and Environment concerning infectious and contagious disease, use of quarantine and isolation, requiring tuberculosis evaluations for certain students who enter college or university classrooms, relating to the Director of Health, and amending KSA 75-5603 and repealing the existing sections. It was a huge amendment, and it was a floor amendment, and it passed overwhelmingly. It went back to the House for a non-concur vote, passed. We can't find anything in the legislative record that shows that this was an independent bill anywhere. It was never heard in the committee that we can find. This was just a floor amendment that appeared and now has been law for 17 years in Kansas. Our concern is having law enforcement ordered into a situation to take somebody into custody based on a health concern. And we think that that runs afoul of the Fourth Amendment. I think you've got some serious constitutional issues here. Our second concern is safety. Quite frankly, we don't have the type of equipment to go into a contaminated, contagious environment and forcibly move people. So in our view, sheriffs are charged under Kansas law, KSA 19-8313, to keep and preserve the peace in the counties. The optics of a sheriff's deputy forcibly taking a child from a parent due to a health concern is not going to help us preserve the peace in a county. If in anything, it will probably cause even more unrest. This is not the type of action that we believe gains the trust of the public, and it would put deputies and other police officers needlessly in harm's way. So we support that language that's being stricken, and I'll be happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Greg, thank you for your testimony. And if it's okay with you, committee, we will wait and hold questions till all proponents have testified. Committee, our next proponent is Melissa Campbell, a private citizen. Melissa, welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Melissa Campbell. Thank you for letting me have the opportunity to visit with you all this morning. I wanted to share just a little bit of my thoughts regarding this 489. It's a great bill. It brings a lot of freedom for the people, and at a time where I feel like government has been overreaching and forgetting that its role is to protect the people from too much government. We've had a lot that has been restrictive that shouldn't be. And so I would love to get you all to be supporting some of these amendments that have been made for this Chapter 65 issue. You have a great opportunity, since you are the Board of Public Health, or because you are the Chapter 65 experts as the Public Health and Welfare Committee, to make these modifications and to kind of restore some trust in the public, because you are restricting government by not allowing the churches to be closed and taking that power away from the KDHE director. It's an important thing that you've stricken here. There's a lot of great things in this, and one of the things that I have felt like was really concerning was this Chapter 65 129B section that does allow the KDHE secretary or the local health officer to come in and remove me or my child from my home if somebody that I don't even know thinks that I'm a public health threat. And that feels like an egregious overreach to me. And, if we could have one person being the authority, and that one person being the authority would be an elected person, I think that would make a huge difference. We need somebody that's going to try to do something like that to be accountable to the people, and preferably your local health boards. And I think the local health boards have a better grasp the ideas of what's going on in society right now. And so we would like to be represented better with them than with somebody who is at the KDHE secretary level that's not an elected official. So I feel like this is really critical perspective. And so removing the sheriff portion for enforcement is really powerful and important. I think as the previous conferee shared, we need to have some goodwill here. And so I feel like the unelected officials needs to be restricted from this bill. I feel like their job is to educate and to inform and to recommend, but not to ever make these mandates and edicts. And so with that, I guess my greatest concern is to take my family to some place of quarantine that's not quantified. They don't give any details in here. Where would that be? What does that look like? And as a parent, it makes me nervous. And I go back to old history, and I feel like if we were to not pass out 489 and we did not listen to the voices of the people, we would be giving the states, the KDHE secretary specifically, the opportunity to put my family in what could appear to be like a concentration camp environment. So we need your affirmative vote for SB 489, and I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Melissa, thank you for your testimony. Committee, this does conclude our proponent oral testimony. We do have a couple of written only. So at this time, we will open up for questions. Committee, do we have questions for any of the conferees? Greg, I do have a question or two for you, if you wouldn't mind. Greg Smith. And if you don't mind, when you answer, just...
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman.
Greg, currently, outside of this current statute, who orders the police officer or law enforcement to execute anything?
Under everyday operations, it would be the sheriff, chief of police, and those that are in the chain of command.
Is there anywhere else in state statute that you're aware of that gives an unelected person the ability to order you to do something?
I'm not going to say there's not, but not that any that come to mind. KEMA obviously came into play, but again, you're dealing with elected officials there and executive orders from the governor. There are emergency management plans that are put into place that may or may not come from an elected official. In fact, there's numerous emergency management plans, but those are things that we train on a monthly, semi-annual basis, those types of things. So they're procedures that we're familiar with, much different than the environment that this particular bill is describing.
Thank you. Committee, further questions? Senator Petty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Greg, good to see you. You mentioned in your testimony about saying that this was a real constitutional issue. And so I wondered if, since you mentioned that, has this legislation been challenged constitutionally?
Has not been challenged constitutionally, but there's a reason for that. It's not ripe. As far as I know, it's never been used in the state of Kansas. Until it's used and until there's a actually ripe instance for the court, it's not going to be challenged.
Okay, so that's good clarifying information. So you're saying it's never been used?
Not that I'm aware of.
But it's the necessity to remove it?
Pardon me?
It's never been used, but it's necessity to remove it?
Absolutely. I think it needs to be removed because I think you are going to have a constitutional issue when it is used. It's a Fourth Amendment. You need probable cause to take somebody into custody, and somebody being suspected of having disease does not rise to the level of probable cause.
Thank you.
Senator Thompson.
Thank you. And Greg, this kind of dovetails with that. Can local health officers' determination that somebody might be infectious or cause a problem, doesn't that also present a Fourth Amendment challenge? Because you could argue that that person maybe is not using all the information available.
Senator Thompson, each circumstance is going to be different, and I hate to opine on a hypothetical. I would just say that in our research and looking at different things, our concern is that the seizure of a person without probable cause or a warrant is going to run afoul of the Constitution.
And would, I guess, removing the sheriff's office from this equation, the health officer then would have the sole authority. I'm looking at, taking out the secretary, but local health officers are not always elected, correct?
I mean, I only know for sure about Johnson County. Our local health officer is an appointed person. But to be clear, as I said at the beginning of my testimony, the only thing that we're concentrating on is that language striking law enforcement from this equation. As to the rest of the bill, we're neutral.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Committee, not seeing any, Senator Petty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question. Thanks, Greg. I have a question for Melissa. And thanks for being here. In your testimony, you mentioned that you feel more confident that you want it to be elected official, but as was just referenced, the bill does speak to local health officer. And that's not an elected position. So do you feel no confidence in the local health officer?
I don't feel a lot of confidence in my local health official. They are appointed. They are doing the bidding of whatever the Board of Public Health, which is in our case, the Board of County Commissioners, whatever they require, and they follow the CDC guidelines. And as we've seen in the last couple of years, they're not dependable in a lot of ways. And so I would not like to have an unelected official like a local health officer in charge of trying to evict my family if they think we're a threat for not being vaccinated or not wanting to have whatever their treatment may be for a disease.
And you referenced that they're following the bidding, and they are following state law. So we're talking about state law. They're following state law.
They're following the guidance of the CDC.
And what we have in state law as well. So both, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned you feel like you be in a concentration camp environment. Have you been in a concentration camp?
I have not.
That was in your testimony. I'm sorry, but you said that.
What I said is that I never want to be in a situation where one of your statutes would allow my family to be taken out of their home to a place of quarantine, and when there's nothing that explains what that may be, and as badly as people have been treated who want freedom, it's a concern that how bad could it be?
Yes. So since you don't like that reference, it would be better not to use that in a public setting like this because it is very offensive.
I appreciate your opinion.
Committee, no further questions for proponents. We'll now turn our attention to opponent testimony. We have one, Jay Hall, Deputy Director and General Counsel of the Kansas Association of Counties, and we do have 9 written only opponent testimony. Jay, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Jay Hall, Deputy Director for the Kansas Association of Counties. I will be brief this morning, but I want to clear up a couple of questions that came up earlier. First, generally the County Board of Health is in fact the Board of County Commissioners. There are a couple of cases where that is not the case, but they are the outliers. Usually it is the county commissioners that are the County Board of Health. The second thing is just to address the issue of a place of quarantine. Generally, the place of quarantine is the individual's own home, unless they request other sorts of accommodations. Generally, they quarantine within their own home. So I just wanted to clear those things up. Now, turning to my testimony, we are concerned at KAC about the section that references or that takes away the KDHE's authority to coordinate with local health departments. And the reason we're concerned for that is that today we all know that we are in Shawnee County here in Topeka, Kansas. An infectious disease doesn't know that. It doesn't respect county lines. It doesn't have any sort of knowledge of where it is or how it's passing from person to person. Most of us here in this room actually don't live in Shawnee County. I happen to live here in Shawnee County, but most of us here in this room do not live in Shawnee County. And so when you go back to your county of where you live, if you happen to carry an infectious or contagious disease with you, your county may not know that, oh, that actually came from Shawnee County. They may not be able to coordinate. And the only way we get that county by county coordination is actually by having somebody at the state assist with that coordination. Otherwise, we have nothing like that. And so I realize that a lot of the concerns that rise with this are because of COVID-19. And COVID-19 is not going to be with us forever. COVID-19 isn't going to be the next problem that we have. Removing the tools from the toolbox now could present us with problems that we can't contemplate right now. And frankly, we can't contemplate them because we don't know what those problems will be. And so I would urge caution when considering these types of changes because we don't know what the next problems will be. We don't know what tools that our local health officers or KDHE or any of those other groups may need. And then finally, I want to touch on the final point that I have, which is talking about not allowing local health officers to prevent gatherings. So if there is an outbreak of tuberculosis or measles or something like that, the local health officer would now, under this bill, be stripped of the ability to limit gatherings in order to prevent the spread of something like tuberculosis or measles or any of the other infectious diseases that have been identified in the past. And so that is obviously of a concern to us at KAC and our member counties. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Jay, thank you for your testimony. Just a quick question. Where's the quarantine location defined in statute?
It's not defined in the statute. Typically, the local health officer works with the individuals that are going to be quarantined to either move them to a location such as a hospital if they need to be hospitalized. Obviously, they would go to a hospital. But if they don't need to be hospitalized, then generally it's in their home.
Yeah, because typically before COVID, we didn't have a fear of the Kansas Health Department secretary, and after we are really fearful. So thank you. Committee, any other questions? Senator Thompson.
Thank you. Thanks, Jay, for being here. Would you say that most of the Board of County Commissioners rely on the local health officer for advisory on their decisions? I think that's what happened, at least what I saw. Is that what you saw across the state?
Well, I would say that the county commissioners typically rely on all of their experts for assistance. So they rely on the local health officer for medical expertise. They rely on the road engineer, frankly, for road expertise. They rely on all of their different department heads for the expertise in that particular field.
And do you have any idea, have you spoken to local health officers across the state about where they derive their guidance on how to make decisions on dealing with COVID-19?
They derive their guidance from a number of different sources. They work with KDHE, they work with the CDC, they communicate with each other, frankly, to get different information. They work with their local hospitals as well. So it's a variety of different places that they get their information.
Would you say that people have the ability to make their own decisions about their own health care rather than having a local health officer determine a one-size-fits-all for each county?
Well, I think that people certainly have the ability to make that determination, but I think that these statutes were put in place because we do have concerns about things like tuberculosis spreading or things like that. And I think that's been a concern in the past that appropriately was addressed in statute.
I guess my question is, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, one more and then I'll get out of the way. My question is, in this day and age and the ability to communicate information via the media, via text, via whatever, if people are given good information, can they not make their own personal decision, and a local health officer or a board of county commissioner be in an advisory capacity only, and that not be sufficient?
I certainly think that they can make their own decision about that, but I think we also live in a world that has a lot of rules, and those rules get enforced. We all certainly, most of us drove here today, and there were rules that we had to abide by when we were driving. And while those are not advisory, I think we're all encouraged to follow those rules, and there are certainly penalties if we do not.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So, Jay, are you saying the speed limits aren't just a suggestion? That's what I had always.
Not that I'm aware of.
Sorry, Greg. Senator Erickson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Jay. I understand your opposition to this particular piece of legislation, but I'm not familiar with the Association of Counties' position on a couple of things specifically. So can you tell me what the association's position was when there was a statewide order to shut down schools? Did the association agree with that?
Our position was to allow the local health officers to make those orders. At the time that the schools were shut down, I believe we only had cases in, I think, I can't remember exactly. It's been a couple of years. I think we only had cases in maybe 16 or 18 counties at the time. And so while I think that it was appropriate to take action in those areas, it may not have been quite necessary when that action was taking place to do it statewide at that time.
Okay, thank you. Did the association have a position on the definition of essential services, as in gatherings of churches, but not that of abortion clinics? Did the association have a position on that?
We did not take a position on what facilities should remain open or not open.
In general, does the association feel like that's a decision that should be made at the local level or the state level?
We certainly would be open to having that decision made locally.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Petty?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Jay, thanks for being here. I was just going to ask you the question, the word quarantine has come up several times now, and you mentioned that the quarantine location is not in statute. Do you know, since this seems to be revolving so much around COVID and what's happened in the last 2+ years, do you know if any county did quarantine someone or some group of people outside of their home?
There were some counties that offered separate facilities if, for instance, someone wanted to quarantine away from their family to avoid infecting the rest of their family. There were some counties that had separate facilities where those individuals could go if they wanted to quarantine outside of their own home. But as I said, most people quarantined in their own home during that period.
Just as a follow-up, do you know if that was mandated anywhere, that they had to quarantine outside of their home?
No, it was not mandated. It was just something that was offered. So if, for instance, and I know that some of our health personnel actually took advantage of that for a period of time where they could go somewhere else so that they didn't risk infecting their own family.
Kind of like what we offer for if there's a tornado or a electricity outage, so I offer that within some counties that there be a place that you can go.
Something similar to that, yes.
Thank you.
Senator Holscher?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here. I do have a question. In case, excuse me, in case this bill were to pass, what would the impact be to counties to be able to respond? Especially, I'm thinking about a lot of our rural areas that are underserved. So could you talk to that point as far as the impact that this bill would have as far as supporting the local levels?
Well, it certainly would be a challenge for some of our more rural areas because they do rely on some of the other information just because they don't have the staff to carry out some of the functions. So they do rely on the assistance of the state or of neighboring health departments. As counties, we try to obviously help each other out when we're dealing with different situations. But I think the lack of coordination that would be lost because the state wouldn't have a role in that would be something that would be a challenge, particularly for our smaller departments.
If I may, is there a funding implication as well, as far as a potential loss of funding?
I don't know that, and I apologize, I'm not an expert on the local health funding. I don't see anywhere in the bill where it would specifically impact funding, but that may be something that I would need to visit with KDHE about to see if that would impact the funding.
Jay, thank you for your testimony, and committee, that does conclude our opponent testimony. We do have a neutral written only. They were going to be virtual, but we're unable to, so it's written only. This does conclude our hearing on Senate Bill 489, so we will close that hearing. Next up, we're going to work Senate substitute for House Bill 2280. And Jenna, could you give us a refresher on where we're at with Senate substitute for House Bill 2280, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Senate substitute for House Bill 2280 has a little bit of an interesting history. It passed out of this committee last year and then came back to the committee this year, and its contents were stripped and substituted with the contents of a couple other bills. And what the bill would do now would authorize the prescription of medications for off-label use to prevent and treat COVID-19 infections, specifically, but not including ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, as well as it would require childcare facilities and schools to grant, and it would expand the religious exemptions for those vaccinations, and would not allow the daycare facility or schools to look into the sincerity of such religious beliefs. And then this bill did pass out of committee, and then it was sent back to the committee.
Jenna, thank you for that. Committee, I know there's some amendments out there. Someone have an amendment they would like to offer? Senator Gossage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And we appreciate the leadership sending this back to committee. We did have a couple of.
Before there's an amendment, can we have a motion to work the bill?
Do we have a motion to work the bill? We have a motion by Baumgartner, second by Erickson. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. Okay, we are officially working the bill now. Senator Gossage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I could, Jenna, if you could pass out the amendment regarding the refill, the fill and refill. And I know I understand we may have some other amendments, so with your permission, Mr. Chair, I'll go ahead and start with my explanation.
Go ahead.
It's very simple. It's just clarifying the language regarding the prescription. And so it would read in N, except as provided, and amendments thereto as may otherwise be provided by law. Nothing contained in this section shall be construed as preventing a pharmacist from refusing to fill or refill any prescription if, in the pharmacist's professional judgment and discretion, such pharmacist is of the opinion that it should not be filled or refilled unless such, and this is in the box, refusal to fill or refill such prescription is based solely on a known or assumed diagnosis of a COVID-19 infection or its prophylactic treatment. That was the initial attempt in the italics when we first passed it. This is just a little bit of a cleanup of that language to clarify.
Thank you, Senator Gossage. Is that your motion to move that amendment?
I do. I move the amendment.
We have a second by Senator Thompson. Do we have any discussion on this amendment before we take it to a vote? Senator Holscher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just would like a little clarification. Is this narrowing, and maybe this is for Jenna, is this narrowing it, the definition from what we saw previously?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Senator. This would, so the initial language specified that that the pharmacist would not be allowed to use their discretion to fill or not fill a prescription if the prescription was being used to treat or prevent COVID-19. And so the pharmacist would almost be required to fill that prescription if it was related to COVID-19, regardless of other professional judgment related to maybe that the dosage is incorrect, maybe there's a contraindication with another medicine. And so this amendment would clarify that the pharmacist could not use their discretion to refill or not fill if that refusal to fill or not fill is only based because the medicine is used to treat or prevent COVID-19. So they would be allowed then to use their discretion if it were a contraindication or it were an improper dosage based upon, whatever other professional judgment that a pharmacist would use to fill it. So it would just tighten up that ability to refuse to fill or not fill the prescription.
Okay, I guess that prompts a follow-up then, if I may. There's nothing that prohibits a pharmacist from filling a prescription at this point. So I guess I'm questioning then, why is this needed? And from Jenna.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There is nothing statutorily that prevents a pharmacist from filling or not filling a prescription based upon usage for COVID-19. I believe that the proponents, or we heard some conferee testimony about possible disciplinary action, but that's not anything that I would be an expert speaking to.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, because my understanding is there's not disciplinary action at this point in regard to the filling of prescriptions or the writing of these prescriptions. So thank you.
Seeing no further comments or questions on the amendment, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Have 2 noes. Would you like your noes to be recorded? This amendment is adopted. We have more amendments. Senator Gossage.
I have one more amendment, Mr. Chair.
Okay, we'll wait for it to be passed out.
If I may.
Go ahead, Senator.
When we first heard and passed 2280 out of committee, there was a provision that shall apply retroactively to any disciplinary action. This just strikes the retroactively and goes forward.
Okay, is that your motion to pass your
That
amendment?
is my motion to pass this amendment.
Do we have a second? Second by Senator Baumgartner. Any discussion on this amendment before we take it to a vote? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. That motion carries. Do we have any other amendments? Senator O'Shea.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm going to go ahead and start, if that's all right. So my amendment is to strike out Senate Bill 398, which was added to this without a hearing. This applies to childhood vaccinations, ones we've been doing for years for childcare and public school attendance. So the way that this bill was added, it adds a new philosophical exemption, and we've never heard this language in statute before. We did hear this on the floor during special session, but it was regarding the new COVID vaccine, which is very different from the normal childhood vaccination schedule. So again, we're talking about childhood vaccinations, not the COVID vaccination. So the ones that adding this Senate Bill 398 deals with includes measles, polio, mumps, diphtheria, whooping cough, just to name a few. These vaccines particularly have been required for school attendants over 40 years and for childcare centers for 14 years. So back to the COVID vaccination requirements, I did hear from constituents who had requested a religious exemption for COVID and then had been, unfortunately, asked a lot of questions about that, and I don't believe that that should have happened. But from what I know, researching, and I've been looking into this quite a bit, there's not been students who have asked to prove or further explain their religious exemptions for just routine vaccinations. So I don't believe that this legislation is necessary. I think it's getting confused with the COVID vaccination. And ultimately, I think if we are going to move forward with this, so if this amendment is shot down, I would just think that we need to vet it and discuss it as a hearing and not just add it to this bill. Thank you.
Is that a motion to move your amendment? Yes. Okay. Do we have a second? Senator Petty seconds it. Any discussion on this amendment before we take it to a vote? Senator Petty.
I think that Senate Bill 381, as was mentioned, deserves to have a full hearing. And this addition to a bill dealing specifically with COVID-19 is quite an extent, a reach. It also includes a philosophical exemption within this language that we never have had a discussion about or have in current law when it comes to vaccinations. We do have in current law religious exemptions available to families, but this really is quite a discussion matter and a big difference from what I think most people will refer to as a religious exemption. So I firmly agree with Senator O'Shea that this amendment should be passed and we would deal with the original bill.
Senator Holscher.
Sorry, somehow my hearing was gone for a second. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would mention that a recent survey that just came out a few weeks ago shows that 9 out of 10 parents favor childhood vaccines. That was a survey conducted here in Kansas by Kansas of Kansas parents, and that was without the COVID vaccine. So we were talking about the regular vaccines that are typically administered during childhood. So I think it's very important that we listen to our constituents in this respect.
Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't support this amendment. This places a test on religious belief or sincerely held belief, which is in Section 7 of our Constitution under the section about religious freedom. And a parent who decides that they have a sincerely held belief that this vaccine is dangerous for their child, or anybody who believes the vaccine is dangerous, in any case, should be believed. And they could have come to that test or that decision within 30 minutes before they were offered this vaccination. So I can't support this. I have a feeling that it does place a test on religious beliefs and sincerely held beliefs, and I think it goes a little too far. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator O'Shea.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to request a question. Do we know of any instances where a child has been questioned for their religious belief for a current childhood vaccination scheduled?
Senator O'Shea, was that question directed to anybody or?
Yes. Senator Thompson, if he's willing.
Senator Thompson.
I'm sure I could find, maybe not the child itself, but the parents, certainly, where given time, I'm sure I could come up with all sorts of examples. But I've heard anecdotally from parents and from their concerns about this situation. You take a look at the fact that these vaccines weren't even FDA approved, and I don't think they still are, unless I've missed something. This was a clinical trial being conducted on the general public, and we cannot force that sort of vaccination on people. And even in a normal context of any vaccine, not necessarily COVID-19, people need to be able to make their own personal freedom. So it's not a matter of whether it's happened, but if it could potentially happen. And I believe in this situation, we cannot force people to make those decisions for their children and for themselves.
Senator O'Shea.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So that's a no. We don't know of any situation where a student or parent has been denied that in the schools. And again, this is not dealing with COVID-19 vaccine. This is dealing with regularly scheduled vaccines, all of which, other than chickenpox, have been around for 40 years. Chickenpox has been around for 14 years with a requirement. And there is an option, if a parent chooses to not do that, then they just can't attend the public school. So again, I think we're just getting the COVID-19 vaccination confused with the others, and it's really scary to think that we're in a society that's going to bring back measles and polio and whooping cough, et cetera.
Senator Baumgartner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a question for the carrier of the amendment. You made reference to language with regard to religious beliefs that has not been discussed before by the legislature. Is that correct?
We discussed it on the Senate floor, but the current language about, one moment.
Are you referencing page 4, Mr. Chair, lines 16 through 19?
So, yeah, it's this theistic and non-theistic moral and ethical beliefs as to what is right and wrong. So someone could just say, I don't believe this, and for that reason, it's considered their religious belief. And so that kind of language, from my understanding, is not currently in statute regarding vaccinations.
I will yield to the senator from Johnson, but then I will ask to go back.
Thank you,
Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Senator Baumgartner. I just want to read directly from the Constitution of the State of Kansas, Section 7. Nor shall any control of or interference with the rights of conscience be permitted. That is in the that's not in statute, that's in the Constitution. We have the right to have our own decisions about our beliefs, not to be tested. And that's where we're at with this amendment. And that's where we're at with parents being forced to make these sorts of decisions. And I'll yield back to the senator from Johnson, Senator Baumgartner.
Senator Baumgartner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will reference that several of us serve on the Judiciary Committee, and this particular language is something that we have been working with, debating, has certainly been included in legislation that we have worked on. So the reference, for those of you that are listening that may not have access, again, it is the use in this section, religious beliefs includes but is not limited to theistic and non-theistic moral and ethical beliefs as to what is right and wrong that are sincerely held with the strength of traditional religious views. So it is something that we have been discussing. It certainly has come up in legislation as well as been debated in committee and on the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator O'Shea.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question for Senator Baumgartner, if she's willing. Has it been discussed in regard to childhood vaccinations?
Senator Baumgartner.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The definition of religious beliefs to be beliefs as to what is right and wrong that are sincerely held with the strength of traditional religious values can be utilized in any topic. In any topic. Doesn't have to be limited to childhood or adult vaccines. It could be the definition for any piece of legislation whereby the threat of religious beliefs being compromised is anticipated.
Senator O'Shea.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So that's no. It's not been discussed in regards to childhood vaccinations. Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Senator Baumgartner.
It is a definition. You could put any noun before or after the application of that definition. Now, if you want us to have that discussion in judiciary and add the noun childhood vaccination, I'll be happy to do that. We've done it on the Senate floor. We can do it in Judiciary Committee. To discount it as not being discussed with that noun is inappropriate for a definition.
Committee, we do have the tax committee that is meeting here in 5 minutes. So our time is up. We have to clear the room so they can come in and do it. We will hold 2280 on where we're at on the amendment, on the O'Shea amendment. We will bring this bill up. If we have time tomorrow after our hearings, we will try to finish it tomorrow. If we don't have time tomorrow, we will do it Thursday. With that, our meeting is adjourned. Thank you.